And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Justin, joined as always by my co hosts, David and JP. So, on today's show, we will, of course, begin with some of the most relevant fantasy news going on right now. We're also excited to discuss our personal rookie crushes. Guys, we are hoping to get higher than normal exposure to. And of course, we will discuss last week's community question replies that we really appreciated from you. So be sure to stick around, listen to that, and give us replies for next week's community question at the end to get into next week's episode. So, that being said, I am excited to throw it over to our headacher, JP, with the news.
All right, with our main story tonight, we have, unfortunately, Rashee Rice. He has 8 felony counts. He had an arrest out for a warrant out for his arrest, and he is cooperating, thankfully. But based on what he did as a rookie, being attached to Mahomes, how well he fit in the role that he was in with Andy Reid, I'm still willing to send a second-round pick for him. I think there's a suspension coming. So we are expecting maybe a 2 to 4 game suspension for Rashee Rice. But check out Drew Davenport FF on Twitter or X for a take from a professional. He has great advice on all legal matters. And in other news, we have a new QB1 on Keep Trade Cut, and that is CJ Stroud. Not how we have it, but the hype train is rolling for CJ Stroud. And as everyone probably knows by now, Stephon Diggs has been traded to the Texans, which we have yet to mention since we haven't had a news segment since the trade. But the offense on the Texans is looking phenomenal. People are excited about CJ Stroud with all those weapons. If you have a CJ Stroud share, maybe go float out a trade for Josh Allen, see if anybody bites. We still have Josh Allen as QB1 at this point, so we would be happy to get that trade done. We also have Malik Neighbors' character issues. I don't know. Let's hope it's just a product of lying season and not a real concern, but that's something to keep an eye out. Another rookie to talk about is Dante Miller. You may not have heard this guy, but he is a rookie running back already on the Giants. He was not in the draft. So Dante Miller has an interesting life story. I encourage you all to take a look into it. But this guy, he played in the Ivy League, and he stood out with electrifying speed and wanted to play at the SEC at South Carolina to hopefully get the NFL attention. There was an issue, though, which reportedly stemmed from South Carolina thinking he had 2 years of eligibility after one of his Ivy League seasons was canceled by COVID. But he really only had 2 years to compete for 1 year, right? That was discovered after he played 6 games. But he hung it up. He's like, okay, hopefully I can just play next year. I'll have the lead back role. But unfortunately, the SEC said, sorry, you already played more than what is a redshirt season, which would be 4 games. So anyways, he worked out at the South Carolina Pro Day, ran a 4.27. So he is interesting, and he's already on the Giants, as I mentioned before.
All right. So that piece I find potentially interesting. I actually think we can't pick up in most sleeper leagues. We're kind of crazy. We've had startups where we can pick rookies up in because, well, the rookies were included in the startup already. High risk way to play. I picked him up this morning in a league. I actually asked you guys if I should drop Eric Gray, another Giants running back, for him. Slower guy for this more electrifying speed potential guy. And obviously, these are guys that we're just hoping to be an any man RB. But David actually encouraged me. Probably aren't going to start Eric Gray since he did literally nothing for you last year. So I think he's potentially interesting as like a spot start running back. David, do you kind of agree with that as if you have nothing better to roster?
I mean, you might as well pick him up. Who do the Giants have in the backfield right now? It's anyone's game there.
It's pretty putrid. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move to some things that we find to be quite the opposite of that vibe the Giants running back room has. We're more talking about the Lions running back room type of vibe. Electric. Love it. We're going to talk about our rookie crushes that we have. So we've been all looking through rookies for the last few months, messaging about them, talking a little bit of trash to each other when we disagree, and really digging into stats, analytics, people's opinions that are like video experts. JP talks to us about Matt Harmon at least 73 times a day. So we've really been diving in like on guys, and we've developed some crushes that we really want to make sure we bring to you guys. JP did go ahead and he challenged us to really make sure we were also picking some guys that are potential late first round picks, early second round picks, which I appreciated that because I think we were going to bring you some names anywhere from the early first round to the fourth round that we think could be potential values for you. So with that in mind, David, go ahead and start us off with your first rookie crush.
Yeah, so first of all, I just need to apologize to our viewers. I'm kind of overcoming a little upper respiratory thing, and I know I don't quite sound right. I might have to pause every now and then, but just hang with me, and I'll let Justin and JP kind of carry my weight. So my first crush, little known prospect out of the Ohio State University, Marvin Harrison Jr. No, I'm just kidding. I do love Marv, but that's not the point of this segment. We're not talking about guys like him. My first crush that I'm going to talk about is Javon Baker, wide receiver out of UCF. He did start his career at Alabama, but transferred to Central Florida for 2022 and 2023 seasons. I'll admit I did not know anything about him during the season. He's someone I discovered early on in the process of diving into this year's class. I really liked the analytical profile we saw from him, and as we go through this process, I've seen more and more creators mention him, whether they're film guys or data guys. We've all seemed to mention him as sleepers pretty commonly. So it's kind of reinforcing that when you see both sides of the community support a player.
Yeah, so we know you're not a film guy. What is it that drew you to Baker's analytical profile, though?
Yeah, so the data set I'm looking at is it's from PFF, and it's all 2024 draft eligible wide receivers with at least 50 targets. So that does not mean that they declared necessarily, just that they were eligible for this year's draft. Of that group, he had the 14th highest PFF receiving grade. He had the highest yards per catch by almost 2 full yards. He was 14th in yak per reception, 7th in yards per route run, 7th highest ADOT. He also had the second longest touchdown, which I thought was pretty interesting. 2.84 yards per route run versus man was good for 20th in the data set and 12th among wide receivers in the draft. 3.3 yards per route run versus zone was 6th in that data set and 3rd among wide receivers in the draft, behind only Marv and Neighbors. I did find some discrepancy with this data, though. There was a tweet put out by the 33rd team on X where they claimed Baker had a 3.36 and 3.6 yards per route run numbers versus man and zone, respectively. I'm not sure how that difference came about. But from their tweet, they also stated that he is one of 6 wide receivers with more than 3 yards per route run versus both. And that group includes Marv, Neighbors, Troy Franklin, Xavier Leggette, and Malik Washington. Next thing I found, something we're kind of looking more into. This stat is becoming more popular this offseason. I didn't really hear it last year. It's first downs per route run.
For sure.
So I don't have the full data set on this year's class, unfortunately, so the context that I can provide is going to be minimal, but I still think it's impactful. His career first downs per route run is 0.11. The highest that I've found so far in this draft class is 0.16 from Marv, but his 0.11 lies right in between Neighbors at 0.12 and Odunze at 0.1, so that's still pretty good company to be in. He played mostly outside, but he did move inside of the slot sometimes. When we're looking at that data set, we're lowering the minimum threshold to 20 targets just so that we can get a bigger data set. So from that data set, he was 3rd in yards per route run and 7th in yak per reception. And then another interesting stat I found posted on X from Jordan Vanek said since 2018, 47% of passing yards in the NFL have come off curls, crossers, and goes. So with wide receivers with a minimum of 50 routes in that set, there are 3 that average over 2.5 yards per route run on all of those route types. That's Javon Baker, Troy Franklin, and Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when you bring up this analytical profile, and then also, I mean, I'm not going to lie, like I've probably heard on 4 or 5 different podcasts people saying they love him from a film standpoint. Definitely understand where you're coming from with this. One concern that I do hear occasionally is just that the athletic profile is a little bit lacking. Not to say it's pedestrian, but it's just not one of those like jumped out of the gyms at the combine type of stuff. Does that concern you at all?
Sure, I don't think he's an elite athlete, but I do think he plays a little faster than he tested. So he was a 7.84 RAS score, which is still 78th percentile wide receiver athlete. That's pretty good. He's 6'1", 202, had solid jumping numbers, didn't do agility testing, and he ran a 4.54, which on the surface actually isn't too bad for a wide receiver. It's not elite, but it's solid. But when we look at tracking data from Real Analytics, they said he hit 21.7 miles per hour on the field. And just for some context, if you were to look at the top 10 ball carrier speeds from the NFL, and this is using a different company's tracking data, I assume they're similar. 7th, 8th, and 9th place all would have been 21.7 miles per hour rounded to 1 decimal place. So he would have been right in that range. Then we also have tracking data from the Senior Bowl. He was the 2nd fastest wide receiver there, according to GPS data. And he did have the highest max deceleration from what I saw, which is pretty important for getting in and out of breaks. So I think he's someone who's shown he can threaten the defense down the field. He's big enough that I think he has a chance to survive outside as an X receiver, but he's also shown me enough in the slot that if he fails there, you should feel comfortable with the transition moving him inside to a bigger slot player. So I think that that kind of makes me less concerned about where his landing spot is, as long as it's somewhere that's going to give him some opportunity. So that's someone I'm really excited about. JP, I know who you're going to talk about. I think that's someone we all kind of like here. So go ahead and tell us why you like this guy.
Yeah, so the player that I really love that I'm going to talk about first here is Ricky Pearsall. I have 2 wide receivers outside of first-round rookie mocks that I really like, and yeah, I'm going to talk about him here first. But the moment I started getting excited about Pearsall was he was one of the standouts at the Senior Bowl. Recent standouts at the Senior Bowl have had a really strong track record, including the likes of Puka Nacua, Tank Dell, Jaden Reed last year, and all 3 of those guys were great in their rookie seasons. But Pearsall, he was cooking guys in day 1 and day 2, displaying some really, really good route running ability. And you compound that with Matt Harmon's work at reception perception. Thank you, Justin, for setting me up there. You see, he's really good with his separation ability. In reception perception database, Ricky Pearsall's success rate versus man coverage is ahead of Malik Neighbors, Ladd McConkey, A.D. Mitchell, and Brian Thomas Jr., and just barely behind Rome Odunze for the best man score so far in this class. Now, he's got 10 guys tracked right now, but you can just see that he is really, really good against man coverage. And against zone coverage, he's only 1% behind the leaders of Odunze, Marv, and Ladd. His press scores, they're not bad. They're the weakest part of it, but they're still solid, right around the average, actually. Pearsall, outside of the route running part that he also has really, really great hands. And one of the best catches I've seen in college football last year. He had a 2.8% drop rate as well, which was 4th best among all draft-eligible wide receivers in the Power 5.
Yeah, so JP, a lot of people peg him as a slot-only guy. I think he played about 60% of his career snaps from there. Do you think that's a fair box to put him in, or do you think he can do more in the NFL?
I do think that he can do more. Pearsall, he sits at 6'1", 190 pounds, so he has plenty of size to play outside without that limiting him. It's almost the exact same size as Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson, actually. I think he'll play both outside as a flanker and in the slot. So there's plenty of versatility, I think, there with him to fit into any wide receiver room, and he'll be on the field in all different, personnel groupings. I mean, you see with his man and zone score, I just think he wins in a lot of different ways. Yeah, these are the main reasons why I love what he offers, but his skill set is great. In my opinion, the size is great. What is actually really interesting on top of that, actually, is he is really, really athletic. His three cone was the best in the entire draft class. His vertical was only a half inch from the best in the class as well, with a 42-inch jump. He also had a pretty strong 40-yard dash with a 4.41. So yeah, this guy is very athletic. He had a 9.78 RAS score. So that's just the cherry on top of everything that I love from his skill set. So tell me, Justin, who is your first crush in this series?
Yeah, so JP kind of called me out here because I'm a little bit of a coward and didn't want to pick anybody exciting. And then after that, and I forced myself to sit down and really evaluate, like, who is it that I really think, like, regardless of landing spot, who is going to be a guy that I'm kind of slamming in that sort of tier that could be going anywhere from the 109 to like 203-ish range that I just feel really certain on. And that guy for me is none other than Xavier Worthy. So I think just analytically, his numbers that he produced breaking out at such a young age. He was 18 when he broke out as a rookie with almost a 40% dominator ranking. Guys like JJ Zacharyson has him ranked as a top 5 wide receiver analytically. There are some concerns about the fact that his rookie season was his best season. However, I'm not really overly concerned about it. This last season, he also had a really good season, just didn't get the touchdowns to have the similar dominator percentage. We know that touchdowns are not necessarily a very sticky wide receiver stat. A lot of them went to AD this year. I don't think that's because he's incapable of doing it. We've seen him do it other seasons. So I just really love the numbers that this guy put up over multiple seasons. And then on top of that, we're looking at a guy that, I don't know if you heard this, he is fast. This man is freaky fast. Actually, the fastest of all time, 4.21. He's faster than Michael Scott when he said, "I'm so very fast," or whatever it is Michael Scott said. I'm not that into The Office, honestly. I just love that gif. I think he's being punished a little bit, just perspective-wise, for how fast he ran there a little bit. I understand there are some other concerns about him, but I just like the fact that he is dropping to me in perspective. I don't really know how to deal with this. I just want to take somebody who has 4.21 speed. I'd have been happy with 4.33. I would still have him ranked about where he is. The 3 years of solid production that he had, the fact that he's essentially grinding the mocks, he's at the 32-33 range of 32nd, 33rd pick in the NFL draft. He is fringe. He's late round 1, early round 2. And with that type of draft capital, the fact that everybody else in this range, we're looking at Brian Thomas Jr., we're looking at guys that have 1 year production like that. We're looking at A.D. Mitchell, 1 year production. We're looking at Ladd McConkey. We love a lot of this stuff, but we also didn't see a large sample size. We're looking at a Troy Franklin in this tier, who I actually like a lot too, but we have concerns with right now as well. So just based on the fact that everyone here has warts, I think that this guy to me is just easily the best overall prospect, and I am very, very excited about him.
I can see why you like him, and he's definitely got some interesting parts of his profile with the production, the speed. Personally, there's some concerns that I have. I'm lower on him personally, but I'm excited to talk a little bit more about him in a future episode.
Bring it on next week for Polarizing Prospects, JP. We're going to have at it.
Let's go.
Bring it. Yeah, no, I actually love that he is polarizing for that reason, because I don't have a lot of 109s. I think I only have one 109, but I have a lot of 111s, 112s, 201s that I think he might be sliding there, and I think that's brilliant value. I'm happy to take him at 109 almost certainly, unless something crazy happens with another landing spot. I'll always reevaluate, but I just love this guy. So I am ecstatic about the fact that he is kind of dropping. There's this John Ross comparison we lazily hear everywhere, except the fact that this guy is a much more complete wide receiver. He had a great production profile. He's not just fast. He is out there running decent routes. So, like I said, I'm just very excited to be able to grab this guy, I think, a little bit later than I would be willing to grab him anyway. So I think I'm going to have a pretty healthy exposure to him. Please go to the Chiefs. Please go to the Chiefs. Anyways, Bills works too. That brings us to David to talk about his next rookie crush. And who would that be for you?
Yeah, so the second player I'm going to talk about here today is Xavier Leggette. Kind of the exact opposite of Javon Baker in that when I started diving into the data on this class, I was a little turned off by him. He only had one season of production, and it came in his 5th season of college. That's a pretty big red flag for analytical profiles. So I kind of moved him to the back burner of my research. And I think that was kind of a mistake. The 5th-year breakout was put into context on a thread posted on X by Brett Coleman. I do recommend going to read the full thread, but I'll give you kind of some of the highlights here. He lost both of his parents within a few years, and that was between high school and his freshman year of college. That's got to be just so hard on anyone to overcome, just as a human, better yet, as an elite athlete. He was a quarterback his senior year of high school, so he wasn't really being developed as a wide receiver in general. So he was a little raw coming into his freshman year in 2019. 2020, we had the COVID season. So his first 2 seasons where he really needed to be developing as a receiver, he kind of had some issues that were more important than football at the time. Also, in his 5 years at South Carolina, they had 4 different offensive coordinators. So it kind of took till his final year for him to develop enough of a route tree and enough trust in his, yet again, new offensive coordinator for them to utilize him properly. He did have an ADOT of 13.8 in 2023, and I think that kind of speaks to him being more than just a guy who makes plays with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, there's definitely some important context to his late breakout, but still, if you're only leaning on 1 season of production, yeah, it better be a darn good one. Could you break down the 2023 season that he just had for us?
Yeah, definitely. It was good too, especially considering South Carolina. 71 catches, 1,255 yards, 7 touchdowns against pretty good competition. This is, again, 2024 draft eligible receivers with 50 targets for this data set. Second highest PFF receiving grade, 6.4 yak per reception, which is 27th. Is the exact same as Marv, and 0.3 yards after catch per reception behind the league neighbors. So it's still good company to be in. 3.15 yards per route run was the 4th highest last year behind Marv, Neighbors, and Troy Franklin. He was 9th in first downs. I've not yet been able to get his first downs per route run, so I don't have that. He was 6th in targets and receiving yards on throws over 20 yards, so we did see him get used down the field, which was a little concern early in his development. We have 6th in PFF grade against man and 4th in yards per route run with 4 yards per route run against man coverage. We have 17th against zone, grade against zone, and 15th in yards per route run, so not as strong against zone as he is against man. And then he lined up in the slot about a third of the time, and he did have the 11th best slot grade and the 12th most yards per route run from the slot, so still mostly utilized outside, but he did show versatility to move inside.
Yeah, so taking a look at those numbers are great. How did he do with his athletic profile, David?
He's a freak, man. I think DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, and I'm not saying that's what he's going to become. I think maybe like 99th percentile outcome for him is an AJ Brown kind of thing. But size speed combo we're talking here, he's a 9.9 RAS score. So 99th percentile wide receiver athlete. Had elite jumping numbers. He was sub 4.4, I think it was 4.39. And he did 24 bench reps. So definitely a freak of an athlete at his size. I think a lot like Baker, he has a chance to succeed outside, and if he doesn't, he has the versatility to move inside. I think he probably has a better chance of moving inside, but I wouldn't start him there, and I wouldn't put him into that box. So, yeah, that's why I like Xavier Leggette, and I'm pretty excited that I've been able to change my original stance on him because he's an exciting player.
24 bench reps. That's incredible, man.
Ridiculous.
Like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even think I could do the bar 24 times.
I was thinking of that. I don't know. It depends on the day. Like,
I have no idea, to be honest, but So, anyways, moving on. JP, time for your second draft crush. Someone you've been talking up all draft season.
Yeah, this is a guy that I've liked since right when the college football season ended. Honestly, that's Jalen McMillan, teammate of Roma Dunze and Jalen Polk. A little bit of backstory with Jalen McMillan: his very very first season in college, that was COVID year, right? So unfortunately, a lot of conferences played basically a full season, but with the Washington Huskies, they're in the Pac-12. They only played a few games, so unfortunately, he didn't really get to have much playing time. I don't know if their practices were limited as well because with COVID, there's the gatherings. They were limited a lot. But if you just start to look at his 2021 season, that was the first full season he really got to play. He led the Washington Huskies in receiving yards, and Roma Dunze was there as well. He was a higher recruit than Adunze, actually. Not to crap on Adunze, I love him. But Jalen McMillan, he was going to be the guy for this team based on how he did the first season, high recruit status. And then in 2022, he was toe to toe with Adunze in production. He actually led the team in receptions and receiving touchdowns. He was about 50 yards behind Adunze in total. So, and the more I look into Adunze this season, dude, I freaking love him. In our rookie pick series in the 105, yeah, if you listen to that, I'm gonna have a pretty strong argument and feelings for Adunze against neighbors, actually. But yeah, I think that just makes me feel even better about Jalen McMillan. The fact that he's gone up against this stud for targets and was right there with him. And in that 2022 season, he was third in the country in first downs behind only Marv and Malachi Corley. And Malachi Corley wasn't even playing at a Power 5 school. And then he was fourth in YAC in the country as well. So I think he is a pretty shifty player. He was known for having pretty good speed at the combine. He did pretty solid there. But McMillan had a better YAC per reception, more of his tackles forced, and better yards per route run against man than Adunze actually in that 2022 season.
That 2022 season, you're presenting some really strong case here, and you definitely have me intrigued. In doing this research with you, we really walked through a lot about how he suffered an injury early in 2023. Do you think he would have continued that same kind of production if he had been able to stay healthy this past year?
Hard to say for sure exactly, but yeah, I mean, I with the way he started this season, I'm not sure if he would have quite kept up to Adunze, but I think he would have been damn close because in the first 2.5 games, and I say 2.5 because in the third game he got injured in the second quarter, but in those first 2.5 games, he was averaging 124.4 yards per game. He was right there with Adunze. But yeah, I don't know with college reporting, they're so vague. They just said he had a leg injury like for a month and a half. Like I don't know if it's knee, ankle. I have no idea, but I know that he tried to come back. He was in practice. He re-aggravated. He was out for even longer. I'm not sure if this even affected him when he came back. But when he did come back too, the first game he was kind of eased in. He only had 5 catches, 26 yards. But then they played Oregon, which great team, and he blew up again just like he did to start the year. And he had 9 catches for 131 yards. He just barely edged out Adunze that game. And then they played Texas. He had a decent game, 5 catches, 58 yards, a touchdown. And then Michigan, it's kind of a crap fest. The Mechanics couldn't do anything. Adunze did do better in him that game though, but I saw McMillan was targeted double-digit times. He was getting missed over and over and over again. So personally, I love this guy. I don't think he's as good as Adunze, but the fact that he was right there with him during their college career, that definitely makes me feel encouraged. And he was a high slot percentage guy, but in the 2022 season, since he had higher yards per route run against man than Adunze, I think that he can play outside too. He has good size. He's 6'1", 190. Just like Ricky Pearsall. I don't know. Maybe I'll have a type here. Who knows? But he also has the 9.33 RAS as well. So he is definitely not limited in that aspect. So yeah, this is the reasons why I really, really love this guy.
Yeah, my next guy and the following guy after that are going to lead you to think I might also have a type as well. To get into that a little bit more, my next pick, my next crush, my first crush, honestly, I'm just listing him second because he is going to be a little bit more of a sleeper pick, is one Luke McCaffrey. Now, coming in at 6'2", 198 pounds, This guy is athletic. So he has a 9.56 RAS score. So that's the 95th percentile of NFL wide receivers coming in. 4.47 40-yard dash, 6.7 second three-cone drill, third in the class here out of participating athletes at the Combine. So you recognize, of course, that last name from his brother, and of course his dad played in the NFL as well. So CMC's little brother. I think that that's going to potentially afford him some extra opportunities in the NFL to develop over time. And I think that he might need a little bit of those opportunities because he actually started at Nebraska, played quarterback before transitioning to wide receiver and moving to Rice. And in spite of making this transition, he actually was an incredibly effective wide receiver. I was impressed.
Yeah, and about his dad, living in Denver, Ed McCaffrey is one of the most popular wide receivers for anyone in my generation. They love him. If you don't know much about Ed and you only know his sons, go check him out. He's really fun. But back to Luke. I'm definitely interested. You have definitely grown my interest on this player through your crush and your speaking in favor of him. But let me know how he was in his smaller sample size at wide receiver. He had, what, 2 years?
Yeah, so his first year as a wide receiver at 21 as a junior, he had a 25% dominator ranking. So obviously, like, we can't compare this. Like, he broke out first year as a wide receiver, 25% dominator ranking. Like, he's 21, right? He's more athletic than the boys he's playing against. So it's like slightly different context, right? It's not like a year one breakout, even though it's his first year as a wide receiver. It's, it's complex. And then his second year, 37.5% dominator ranking. That means after 5 years, he'll have 100% dominator. I'm kidding. Obviously, it's not going to keep increasing like that. But I just love to see that year-over-year growth. Can't project what will happen as he continues to grow, but I just love to see guys that do improve. Yards per route run, 2.25, 2.11 respectively. Senior year, 71 receptions, 992 yards, 13 touchdowns. I'm so in on this guy. It's crazy. Big part of that has to do with where I think I'm going to be able to get him in rookie drafts. Like, I feel like I'm probably going to be very comfortable drafting him in the mid to late third. Depending on where everyone else goes, I could see myself drafting him a little bit earlier than that just because I know these jerks are going to snipe me if they can. I think once you get into a certain range, you kind of want to pick your guys, and this is my guy. From a kind of film standpoint, some guys I've listened to, so Debro, watching him at the Senior Bowl, really said he can find soft spots and zones well. So we have like a really athletic guy who's smart, can find some of those soft spots. He's hardworking. He picked up this position so fast. I see a guy that I think has low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 upside, and he's got a name that will sell. So, like, if he hits some sort of a ceiling, I think people will be excited. So, like, I will be honest, there's a part of my process here. I want to get pretty high exposure on this guy. If he hits, I want to sell 50%. Even though I think like there's a good chance he is all that or pretty solid. Like, he's to kind of quote Scott Connor, a potential like innings eater wide receiver. He's a guy that I think is very startable if he hits what I think he's capable of doing. I don't necessarily project him to be a like wide receiver 1 type of player, but he's the type of guy that you need on a dynasty roster. And I think that if he hits that type of threshold potential in his first couple of years, given narrative of all of this, great opportunity to sell for even more profit as well at any point that he does. And even though I love him, I will dump him for a profit in probably half the leagues I pick him up because it's always the best process to cash out some while you're ahead. So that is also a part of my process. I have to admit, it's not all just the numbers, it's also economics. So that being said, I am going to bring it to David, and tell me, who is your third crush? I've been very excited to see some of the stuff you've been sharing in our Discord channel with us about what you really like about this guy.
Yeah, so the final guy I'm going to talk about here is running back Kimani Vidal out of Troy. I assume that's how you say his name, but, never heard it out loud, actually, I don't think.
Please correct us in the comments if it is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he does have the lowest floor of anyone that I've mentioned today, maybe anyone we've mentioned today to this point.
So far,
yeah, that's fair. He's a little short. He played at Troy, so those things are kind of working against him. I think there's a chance he goes undrafted, and if that happens, obviously I'm going to have to adjust my rankings. But I kind of think there's a better chance that he goes day 2 rather than undrafted.
Did you just say you think he has a chance at going day 2? I'm going to be honest, I've liked things you've shared about him, but you're going to have to sell me a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, I did say a better chance of going day 2 than going undrafted. I do think day 3 is the sweet spot for him, probably in the 4th or 5th, maybe 6th round, somewhere in there. But when you look at the data, I think it paints a picture of a potential 3-down back. He might be short at 5'8", but he's not small. He's 213 pounds. He's a very good athlete. He had an 8.85 RAS score, and he was given the highest in-game athletics score by Real Analytics, who, again, they have GPS tracking data for these players. I don't know how they come about this score, but given that they have the tracking data, I'm going to trust that there's at least some validity to it. I think he's similar build and athleticism to MJD. I will admit that I know a lot. I watched a lot of MJD as a kid, but I was a kid. I had no idea how to build an analytical profile at that point, so I don't know how they compare beyond the athletics. But we go beyond his athletics, and Vidal's a solid pass protector. He had the 6th highest PFF pass block grade among 2024 eligible running backs with over 100 carries. He was pretty good in the passing game, not elite, but at least good enough to not need to come off the field. 87 career receptions, 678 yards. He was given the 16th highest PFF receiving grade among that group. It's just a fun profile when you look at everything, and the real fun comes when you start looking at his rushing production, though. So he had the 6th highest PFF rushing grade, had 2 seasons over 1,000 yards, and all 4 of his seasons at Troy were over 500 yards, 27 total touchdowns. He had 81 missed tackles forced last year, and second place had 70, so that's about a 15% increase from second place to first. His second most yards after contact, behind only Audric Estime. He still was tied for 12th in rushes of 15-plus yards, so he's a little explosive. And then I will admit he did have the most carries in FBS last year, so I'm using raw data instead of the per carry estimates. It does help my case a little bit, but they're still very solid numbers when you adjust for a per carry basis. And I will say I really like seeing sustained success over a larger sample size, so I do find a little more impact from a profile of someone who has as many carries as he does. He was 10th in PFF elusive rating also, which, again, just shows that he's not just some big guy, short bowling ball. Very athletic, though. I don't think he's the kind of guy that's going to be like an NFL rushing champion or something, but I do think if he's given an advantage or an opportunity in the NFL, he's going to take advantage. So for me, I just want to see him go somewhere where he's not behind a young stud, so maybe he can get his chance. I'm not going to lie, I'm going to cut it off here, in part because my throat's going on me, but also in part because JP has refused to tell us who he's going to talk about here, and I can't get over the suspense. JP, you got to tell me,
JP,
who is your third guy?
Tell us. We need to know.
We've been guessing all day.
We're dying.
Yeah, everyone listening, to come up with my third guy, I was thinking deeply on this, and I told them I didn't even put in the doc. I was like, I'm just gonna keep it as a surprise here. So yeah, I think you guys will be just completely surprised. And my third guy here is, wait for it, Jermaine Burton.
Oh,
I think it fits your vibe.
Yeah, I mean he's about 6 foot 190, so yeah, I got a type.
Plays more outside than the other two, though.
Yeah, well, what kind of intrigued me with Jermaine Burton was I just felt like I hadn't really deep dived into him, and I started to look at his stats a little deeper because I started to see his name circulating a little bit more on X. And when you look at his stats, going back to his freshman season at Georgia, he was playing with George Pickens, and in that season he only had 100 fewer yards than George Pickens as a freshman. And then in 2021, he led Georgia in receiving yards for the receivers. Brock Bowers, he was right behind Brock Bowers, who is phenomenal. But the numbers don't really pop because they're not a high, flying offense there in Georgia. And admittedly, it's not like fantastic numbers. But after that, he transferred over to Alabama for the 22 and 23 season. And in 2022, he led the team in receiving. And in 2023, he led them in receiving. So that's what kind of made me think, he is getting talked about more. Is there something more to it? Because this guy was really highly recruited coming out of high school too. Supposed to be super, super fast, which, he ran a 4.45 at the NFL Combine as well. So he's got plenty of speed as well. But this is kind of why I started to get a little bit more interested in him. But there's definitely some more intriguing things. There's some film guys that love him. Absolutely love him. I've just heard people rave and rave about this guy.
Yeah, I will say Burton's someone I kind of hadn't done much research on either, and he's someone that I need to catch up on because the last few days, few weeks at least, I've started to hear some good things too. So I think that's a good peg there, JP.
Yeah, I know. It's just kind of been crazy. I've heard a lot of people talk. Every phone guy, I've never seen them crap on him. So when I looked a little deeper too, on 145 targets the last couple seasons, he only had 2 drops, 1.7% drop rate, which is third best in the class. He had the second best yards per target over expectation in this class as well. I think that his explosive nature, all the big plays that he provides, that he did in college at least, I think that's going to translate in the NFL. I think teams are going to covet that. And I don't know if a lot of people are talking about it, but I have a suspicion that he's going to go day 2 because of, being at Georgia, being at Alabama, being a solid, productive player, and that explosiveness that he brings. And what I also liked was he was running a real NFL route tree. They're at Alabama. They have a very, very pro style, of offense that they run. So, yeah, this is kind of the things that got me really intrigued with him. And I'm really, really interested to see if he does end up sneaking in the back of round 2.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see for sure. We only made, I think, 12 or 13 wrong guesses before we gave up, and that was not one of them.
I really did think it was going to be Johnny Wilson, who, by the way, is also someone I need to look more into the more I think about it.
Yeah, so my next guy here is not going to be a surprise for you two because I haven't stopped shutting up about him for the last 72 hours since I picked him. So to be honest, again, I also have a type here. And so my entire process with this next guy, Frank Gore Jr., running back, Southern Miss Golden Eagles, it'll deep dive kind of on all of the legacy players, even I think it's Tariq Owens, son of Terrell Owens. Obviously, we have Brendan Rice. I don't remember who Marvin Harrison Jr.'s dad was.
I think he played soccer or something, right?
But yeah, so I want to do a little bit of research on all these types of guys. And to be honest, my process here really did start with the name, right? I put this guy into my fantasy lineups when I was just starting out. His dad, that is. I think there's going to be some potential resale value here. So let's see, is there something a little bit deeper here? I think Frank Gore has some potential value, and I think I'm going to really be targeting him in the 4th round of rookie drafts, unless he doesn't get drafted at all by the NFL. I think he's a guy that I think will be a nice potential to be to credit Scott Connor, any RB on a 53. Somebody who not just could be a spot start running back, but who, if he gets a spot start opportunity, I think will have more resale value because of the name before he even plays. Hey, what if this guy hits? And at that point, like I talked about earlier, I will hold some. I like lottery tickets, but I will also liquidate some.
That is an interesting process, and it does make some sense to me, but what backs it up with this player?
So 757 career rushing attempts. So love a guy who really gets that many carries, 4,022 yards, 26 touchdowns, 2,778 yards. So that's 69% of his yards coming after contact. I do want to acknowledge Southern Miss, not necessarily the same high level of competition as some other players that we're, really interested in, we're looking at. But he also had 75 career receptions, 20.5% targets per route run percentage in his senior year. So this is a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's running routes. He's getting the ball. Also, 8 career passing touchdowns. So I think that's interesting. He did play some quarterback a couple of years, a little bit here and there when they just had some real instability, just sometimes, not a lot, like not even full games. But it's just interesting when you see a guy who's kind of this versatile. He is super explosive. You watch highlights, you'll see 50, 60-yard runs all over the place. He had one bowl game against Rice, 321 rushing yards, I believe it was, as well as a passing touchdown, 2 rushing touchdowns. It was obscene. David and I were looking through some stats. I was like, no, he had like 1,300 yards this season, and David is looking at a different source. He's like, no, it's 1,000 yards. I'm like, how could it be off by that much? I'm like, even a bowl game? And then we looked it up, and it was 300 plus yards in a bowl game. Just like, man, David, what your response again to that was what?
What does he think he is, Jason?
Pretty much, right? Like just a wild bowl game there. So I really like that production profile as, like a potentially intriguing thing. Again, I'm not trying to tell you to pencil him in really high in your drafts, but this is a guy I'm smashing in round 4. Then athletically, he came in 5'8", 201 pounds, did not run at the combine, which makes me think he plays a little bit smaller because I did read him quoted at 195 everywhere before the combine. He weighs 6 pounds more than that. I mean, maybe it's just his agent said, like, they saw you on tape. They know you're fast. Don't worry about that. Worry about bulking up, showing them you can be bulky, and then don't run slow at the combine, basically. So I think there's a little bit of that playing the game. So I'm not that worried about the fact that he didn't run, but when we see that same real analytics that David's talking about for that in-game athleticism score that we like to look at, he came in at 95.2 in-game athleticism score, which was just fractions of a percentile below combine darling Isaiah Guerendo. So again, not a perfect prospect, but somebody that I am crushing on nonetheless.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting process that got you there, but I might have to look into him a little further based on the data you laid out for us. And I also think it's interesting that we found 2 reputable sites that don't report the exact same data. So it's just something to look into as you go through your own process.
Yeah, we got to chuckle over that when we were going through for sure. One thing that also brings us quite a bit of joy is our weekly community questions. So I'm going to do a little bit of an intro into this, as this is just our 2nd episode, and I don't want to make David talk too much about it with his sore throat.
Thank you.
Because we're going to make him record another episode right after this, but a real short one. So this is one of our favorite things that we are doing. Shout out to David for coming up with this idea, because I really love it. The more and more we do it, the more we have to think about, like, what are good questions to ask. But what we're doing every week is we're asking you guys questions about how you play, what process you're trying to go through, how you value things, what type of resources you use, so that we can beat you in your leagues. I'm just kidding. It's because, like, we want to learn from you guys, right? We didn't get into this because we thought we're smarter than everyone. We got into this because we thought this is literally like the best way for us to, like, grow and become better. And we want to grow and become better from learning from you guys, not just you guys learning from us. Like, we think this is a collaborative process, and David really pitched us on this idea that we are all excited about. So we have a question from last week that we are going to go ahead and read a few responses that we have. The previous question is, how much does market value impact your personal rookie rankings?
Yeah, so our first response here is from Awesome Dumpling. Thanks for replying on YouTube. We appreciate that interaction. But he said, as a newer Dynasty player with very little college football knowledge, I basically have to solely go off of market value. I'm not very good at understanding the intangibles of a rookie, so I definitely rely on experts and rankings, as well as podcasts like this. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great starting point. That's how I start. Is I just look at, okay, where's the market at? Because I do pay attention to some college football and have a general idea, but I think the NFL transition, there's some guys that you get surprised with, oh, well, the NFL does not view this guy very highly. Maybe am I too high on this guy? But anyways, I think it's a great starting point, and that's why we kind of dive deeper into these guys. But yeah, I think the intangibles, that's one of the best things you want to look at, and the combine kind of highlights that as a great starting point for a lot of evaluation.
Another response we have here from our good friend Trav Bob. We're in a handful of leagues with him. Simple answer: if I view two rookies as dead even, I'll take the one that people might buy, even though I think they're basically the same dude. I think that's a pretty good process. So he tries to form his own opinions, but if he really doesn't have much of an opinion, he thinks two guys are the same, take the one that can sell better. Liquidity is a lovely thing. So I really appreciated that response.
Yeah, and our final one we're reading today is from In Eric We Trust. He says, it's more the longevity or stability of the rookie value with firsts and early seconds. I have no insight into player order. I just listen to people who do know and follow their tiers. And I think this is a good point, and not just for people like Eric or Awesome Dumplin who don't follow college football. Even if you're an expert in this process and you've done it hundreds of times, well, probably not hundreds because you'd be old, but even if you've done this a lot, it's important to listen to what other people who are also well educated on the subject say. If you find you're growing a consensus on a player take with a bunch of other really smart people, that helps reinforce your stance on that player. But if you hear other people giving contrarian takes, it maybe forces you to dive a little bit deeper. So I do think even if you are an expert, listening to what other people have to say is pretty important.
All right. So now that we have heard from our community, and thank you again for sharing so much, honestly, means the world to us. David, what thoughts do you have on this question about how to evaluate these players?
Yeah, in Dynasty, you kind of have to play the market, so it's smart to consider the market value. But if I'm going to draft a player based on market value, not my own personal evaluation, then I need to have a plan for why. And I actually have a good example from last year in a trade between myself and JP. He was on the clock at 103 in a league. I was at 104. He did not have much of a preference between Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. I think we both maybe had Stroud a smidge higher than Bryce Young. But if you'll go back to last year in the summer before we knew about these players in the NFL, most people did have Bryce Young higher. The market had him higher. So his offer was 103 and an early third, ended up being the 302 for my 104 and my personal 24 second, and I ended up winning the league. So it was only moving back a few spots. Could have been a little bit more depending on how variance and stuff goes throughout the season. But I felt it wasn't a high price to pay. And my plan with that pick, no matter what, was to try and trade that quarterback that I drafted. I didn't have an opportunity to do that in the draft. So I wanted to take the higher market value and attempt to go through with my plan and sell him over the summer. I was able to sell Bryce plus for Josh Allen. It was like a first round pick and some other stuff involved in there, but mostly Bryce in the first. So I feel like that was a win-win for both JP and I, even though on paper it looks like a massive loss for me trading more value to take Bryce Young over CJ Stroud. So I think as long as you have a plan and you follow through with it, like follow the market, that's great. But if you're planning on keeping the player, you want to go down on your own ship. If you're going to be wrong on someone you want to keep on your roster, make it someone you believe in.
Yeah, and I think this episode is a great example. We have just certain players that we have a lot more conviction of. So those guys I'm probably going to keep a lot of times. Sometimes, in the draft you have a value, at a position, like just say if Jahmyr Gibbs or something. I know, David, in that draft that you're at the 105. You're deciding between JSN and Gibbs, which at that time, they were viewed very, very similarly. JSN had the bad landing spot, but you like to go Gibbs, which I believe you even traded him anyways. But
I did before the season also to Justin.
Yeah. But I mean, at that point, you kind of just felt about the same. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs had a great draft capital. JSN had a little bit of a worse landing spot. You need a running back. So you're like, okay, well, I'll just take Jahmyr Gibbs. That was going to be the smart decision anyways with how it went. But yeah, I mean, you still traded him and got value for a rookie. But yeah, I'm going to keep the guys that I have conviction on. But I think exploring the trade options, if you're not super convicted on guys, is pretty smart, just like how you did with Bryce Young. that's just a great example there.
Guys, do you think we trade too much?
Impossible. Well, maybe possible,
That's
but
true. No, it's kind of my thought on this is anybody who says like I really appreciate the perspective about like those two guys saying like I get so much of it just from other players, other resources, other like experts. Like anybody who doesn't care what other experts say, I think is kind of dumb. Like you don't have to agree with them, but to not be like tuned in and listening to what other people and the market sentiment are like we want to say like keep doing that. Like we don't think that we are like the end all be all. We don't think anybody's the end all be all, right? So like that type of like a looking at everything, right? Get as many different data points and from those different data points try to create your own type of process, right? Like if you look at like our presentation earlier, right? We referenced all types of people that we like listening to, experts that we heard, people that gave us perspective on stuff on X, as well as looking at, you know, stats, as well as looking at, you know, like the athletics and everything. So yeah, like the value in listening to what people say is absolutely a huge part of playing. So never really lose that. Just hopefully over time you also start to build your own process on top of that and have that as part of the process. But I really like that. And don't lose that, guys, if you're listening, that ability to always be tuned in, listening to as many and reading as many different perspectives as possible, I think is really how we learn how to then come up with what our own perspectives are later on. So, with that being said, I'm going to have JP read our next community question to give David's voice a little bit more of a rest.
Yeah, so next week's community question is how much does unexpected draft capital, either good or bad, impact your rookie rankings? And I think that this is an important question because last year we saw a lot of this unexpected draft capital.
Yeah, and of course, if you are watching us on YouTube, thank you so much. Please go ahead and just throw a comment in the bottom there, and we will feature you on next week's episode. You can also reach to us at DinoConFF on Twitter. Email us at dinoconstructionff@gmail.com. As always, like we appreciate it more than you will ever know. When we saw we had a comment in our YouTube video last week, we all got excited. Like we were like, oh, it was a good time. Almost as excited as when we saw we had 100 views on the 101 episode we have. We fangirled about that pretty hard too. So we really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us, because it was a lot of fun and very helpful for us to have to really support these crushes we've been developing with data. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you view and listen. Really appreciate 5-star reviews on Spotify if you're viewing there as well. And from all of us here at Dino Construction, until next time.